Okay, so this is the biggie. This is what 90% of this workshop is going to tackle: coding. Okay, so this is important because it's how you're going to add content, but it's also, and even more importantly to the design side of things, it's how you're going to customize the shit out of your site. All right, so before we talk CSS coding, we really have to talk HTML because you can't have CSS without HTML. So I'm gonna break this all down for you, and then we'll go through example after example when I start screen sharing. So don't get overwhelmed. I know that this might sound like fucking German right now, but I promise over the next few hours and this training that it's all going to start clicking and making sense. All right, so HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Not something that you really need to remember, but remember HTML. So HTML is the content of a web page. So every web page that you look at online is written in a language called HTML. All right, so think of HTML as the skeleton that gives every web page its structure. Okay, it dictates, when text is formatted like a paragraph, when it's a headline, when text is bolded, when it's underlined, whether a string of text is hyperlinked. It even dictates, when an image appears on the page. So let me show you HTML in action. All right, so let's take this Word doc, okay? So notice how it's formatted with titles and paragraphs, bold text, links, the whole shebang. Now this is because Word allows you to format your document, and that's much the way that HTML works, but without tags or coding, okay? And that's what a website needs to read content. All right, so let's take this Word document. So notice how it's formatted with titles and paragraphs, bold text, links, the whole shebang. This is because Word allows you to format your document, right? Well, HTML works much the same way, but it uses tags and coding, which is what browsers need to display the content on your website. So watch what happens when I copy and paste the content of this Word document as it is into an HTML document and then view it in a browser. Bam, formatting is gone and things are looking all bad. So how do you add back in the formatting so that it displays online like it displays in Word? That's HTML. All right, so here's the same document in an HTML format. So it's got the tags, which are in the varying colors, that are gonna help to structure the content on the page so that it displays correctly online. So now that we've got the tags in, let's take another look at this document in the browser. Bam, we nailed it, right? So it's back to looking how it did in Word. All the browsers add default styles to these HTML tags to give the content a structure. Okay, so while this looks a hell of a lot better than the hodgepodge that was that last HTML tagless version that we just saw, this version still lacks any unique brand style or flair, right? And that's really what we want out of our website. I mean, that's why you're choosing your font theme and color palette and all those other ingredients that make up your visual brand identity. Now that's where CSS comes in. All right, but before we tackle CSS, let's just keep diving into HTML. Okay, so back to HTML tags. All right, so there are some basic principles in formatting when it comes to HTML tags. So each tag has an opening and closing bracket, and that's really just a less than and greater than sign, and then the tag sits in between that. Now a closing tag has a backslash before the tag and that closer greater than symbol. And then the tag is surrounded on the specific content. That's what's going to be formatted, right? So anything that's within that opening and closing tag, like you can see on the screen, is what that tag is going to format. So every line or every sentence on this document is wrapped around a tag, whether that be a paragraph tag, which is that P, or a heading tag, which is the H2 or the H4 tags. So here's the deal. There are a ton of HTML tags. So I thought about it, but rather than putting some beast of a cheat sheet together, I want to just introduce you to one of the coolest free tools out there, W3 Schools. All right, so W3 Schools is an interactive website that has tons and tons of tutorials and resources for learning HTML and CSS, among a couple other web developer languages that I don't want you to even worry about. So here's a screenshot of the HTML section, and I want to point out a couple of things. So I would highly suggest that you devour this section and you really dive into all the awesome that's packed in this. Okay, so on the left side, you see all the different categories of HTML tags. So let's say that you want to add a heading tag. You're not sure what that tag would be, right? So if you click on the section on the left that says HTML headings, that's going to open up a window that breaks down exactly how to apply a heading tag to your content. Now, the second thing, and the even cooler part, why I really fell in love with W3 Schools, is that it provides this try it for yourself option that you see at the bottom of the screen, that green button. So when you click that on any of the screens, it's going to open up another window, and with this interactive screen that lets you play around with the tags live so you can really see how they work, right? So that's why I said it's totally interactive. So it's great for those of you, if you're like me and you're really a hands-on learner and you kind of got to get in there and do this stuff yourself before it really clicks. So when in doubt, when you don't know what kind of HTML tag to use for something, by all means, pop over, bookmark W3 Schools so it's really easy to get to, and then search on that left side for whatever you need to find. The same is the case for CSS. If you look at the top of the screen, they've got those other languages they cover. CSS is the next one, next to HTML. All you have to do is click that, and then all those left side options are gonna turn into CSS, and you can search for the same thing when you're looking for a CSS property, but we'll get to all that in just a second. I just want to introduce you to W3 Schools. So in case you're wondering, well, how the hell would I know what tags to use? They are right friggin' here. Okay, so now that you have a decent understanding of HTML, I know you're not fluent in it yet, but bear with me. You have the basics down. So now I want to talk to you about CSS and how magical it is. Like, I feel like pixie dust is just flying down. It's really, truly that magical. So at its most basic level, CSS is how you style the appearance of your content. So think of the CSS coding as your editor, right? So much the way that Word works, it's going to tell elements what color to be, what spacing to apply, what fonts, what font sizes, and so on and so forth. All right, so what the hell does CSS stand for? Cascading Style Sheets. All right, in a nutshell, it's a document that you're gonna upload to your site that allows you to change the appearance and positions of HTML elements and then other classes on your web page. Okay, so I want you to think of it this way, like let's just break it down. HTML is your content structure. CSS is your content style. So back to that Word doc that we were working with before. Remember, we added tags that created the headlines and bolded the text and styled the links and all of that good stuff, but it was still lacking any style. So here's that same document with the same HTML tags. The difference here is that I applied CSS to those tags. Okay, so I told it what color, what font size, what font family to make headlines and paragraph text and links. All right, so remember, this is what it looked like, just the HTML only version, right? No CSS applied to it. Again, here is the CSS version. So CSS styles have been applied to it. Huge difference, right? All right, so I want to give you some examples. So let's take a portion of that same document that we've been working with. All right, so the first line, the number one breakup no one saw coming. Now remember, that had an HTML H2 tag around it. What CSS allows you to do is target that HTML tag, which again in this case is an H2 tag, and then style the hell of it. Okay, so here I've specified the font family to use, the size of the font, the weight, the color, and I also told it to make everything uppercase. Now, anytime I wrap a headline or any piece of content on my site in an H2 tag, this same styling is going to be applied to it. Okay, this is what eliminates the need to manually style every fucking headline or every paragraph, right? Which, trust me, that is the world's greatest time suckage, okay? It's all about making site-wide styling so that you don't have to style every element on every page individually, okay? And you can apply this type of styling, the CSS, to any HTML element, okay? Headlines, paragraphs, links, images, you name it. And then once you add the style sheet to your site with these styling instructions, each and every browser now knows exactly how to display your site, okay? Whereas when we have that default HTML version, when you view that with no styling to it, different browsers are going to display it differently because different browsers have different default settings. Chrome, Firefox, Explorer, all of them, they have, like, let's say, different default paragraph text, different default H1 font families, and so on. So when you apply CSS, the browsers know exactly how to display it, and it will look the same across the internet. All right, so back when we were talking HTML, I said, no big deal, don't worry about what the hell HTML means. Not the case for CSS. I absolutely want you to understand what CSS stands for. And remember that it's cascading style sheets. Now, there's a really important piece of cascading style sheets, and it's the cascading part, okay? So browsers read the style definitions on your sheet from top to bottom. Okay, so this means that styles defined lower in the style sheet override previous styles defined earlier in the sheet. You can also have multiple style sheets, okay, and which override each other in different areas. And I'll show you more about this as we go through the workshop, okay? But what I want you to understand here is that the style sheets that you create for your site, we're going to make sure that that's the last style sheet read by the browser so that it overrides any default styling from your other default style sheets. So let's go over what a style definition looks like in CSS and some terminology that you're going to run into. So a CSS definition is made up of a selector, a property, and a value. So I want to talk to you about what each one of these mean and how to format them. So a selector is the type of content that you're targeting to style. Okay, so this can come in the form of an HTML element like the paragraph tag or the H2 tag that we've been talking about, or you can target an HTML class. And again, we'll get into this a little bit later in the workshop. So when it comes to an HTML element, the property is always the HTML tag without those opening and closing brackets or that less than and greater than sign. So instead of less than H2 greater than, which is the HTML tag, what we're going to use for CSS is just H2. Okay, now when it comes to an HTML class, the property is a period followed by the class name. But like I said, don't worry too much about this right now. I'll really explain HTML classes as we get into the actual coding. So we've got the selector. Next is the property. Now this is the type of styling that you're going to apply to your HTML tag or class. So for example, it could be the font family or the color or adding a border. So the property is always followed by a colon and then a space. Okay, so that takes care of the selector, the property. The last thing that we need to talk about is the value. And that's going to tell CSS exactly what you want to apply to the property that you listed. So here that might be the exact font or the exact color or exactly how you want the border style. Now the value is always followed by a semicolon. Okay, then last thing, properties and the corresponding values that go with them, those always reside inside of a set of curly brackets. And I'm sure there's another technical term for that, but what the fuck ever. I call them curly brackets. So let me show you some examples and I'll break down a couple other idiosyncrasies of CSS definitions. So you can always target an HTML tag with this separate definition. But sometimes it's a time saver to combine them, like in the case of the example that I've used here with header tags. Okay, so you could have a separate definition for each header tag. But let's say all of your header tags are going to have the same font and they're going to be the same color. In that case, you can combine them into one tag and then simply override the size, which is the only factor that's going to be different between your heading tags, with separate definitions for just that. Okay, so on the left side here, you see 3 separate definitions for your H1, H2, and H3 tags. Now on the right side, there's one combined one, okay? And that's accomplished, combining them, by breaking up the selectors with commas. No spaces, just comma in between. So since all 3 of the headers have the same color and font, it's a total waste of time to retype those properties and values 3 different times, right? Instead, what you can do is simply override the font size specified here in separate definitions. So let's say that you want your header tag to be the font size of 30, but you want the H2 to be 24, and let's say the H3 to be 18 pixels. So all you need to do is override that. To override that is add the font size property and then that value, which is the actual size you want, and then voila, right? Your style sheet will tell the browser to adjust those headers with the new sizes, right? Again, that's the magic of cascading. There's no need to redefine these repeating factors when you can just add only the ones that are different. Okay, so there's a couple benefits of combining selectors. The first is, when you want to change a property later on, you don't have to do it in multiple spots. You just have to do it in one, right? So let's say that you decided to change your headline font. Instead of doing it in 6 different areas, which is how many headings you have on your website, you can do it in this one combined one, bam, done. We're talking like 5 seconds of coding. The second reason is the more condensed you can make your cascading style sheet, the faster your site's going to be able to load. Now, I've got probably thousands of definitions on my website. So I don't want you to think like we're talking 20 or 50 and anything more is just going to make your website so slow. It's not like that, but you definitely want to combine where you can, because the more coding that a web browser has to read to display your content, obviously that's going to slow it down. So it's just some food for thought. When you can combine, do it. All right, so CSS isn't just for text styling either. You can style images, widgets, pretty much any type of content you have on your page. So I wanted to tackle some image styling so I could show you some more examples of how CSS works. So let's say that you want to round the corners of your images. You want to add a thin yellow border and then put a little space in between your image and that border, let's say 5 pixels. All you have to do is create a CSS definition that targets the HTML image tag, which is what all images on your site are going to be wrapped around. And the HTML image tag is less than sign, IMG, greater than sign. So the CSS selector is going to be IMG, right? We're going to take away the opening and closing bracket. So the CSS properties for the rounded edge is border radius. Remember, we're going to put in a colon there in space. And then the value for that subtle rounded edge is going to be 5 pixels. Now the CSS property for the border would be border and then that colon in space. And the value here, since we want something really subtle, we'll go with 2 pixels. And that's just the weight, right? That's the thickness of the line. And then followed by the type of border that we want. And let's just say here we're going to use solid. And then followed by the actual hex code, right? So that's the color. It's a pound sign and then a 6 alphanumeric code that signifies exactly what color you're using. Now, I included this one because I wanted to show you how not only can you have multiple selectors, but you can actually have multiple values for one property, like you see here that I did with the border, right? So we can include each of the values that'll tell the browser exactly how to display your border, right? So I could separate those in the same definition, right? So I could say Border dash weight and then put 2 pixels. And then border dash style and put solid. And then border dash color and put this. But I wanted to show you how I could just style the entire border as the same value just using the border property. Okay, so lastly, the CSS property for the space between the image and the border, that's going to be called padding. Okay, and again, that's going to be followed by a colon and space. Now here, remember I told you about W3 schools. So if you are like, well, how in the fuck would I know that that's called padding? You'll learn a lot more in this workshop, and we'll know by the end of this that that would have been padding. But for sanity's sake, that's where that website's going to come in so handy. So image spacing, anything that you want to search in CSS, you're going to have all these options to read up on it, and you're going to have that interactive window to play with and figure out exactly how to get that space. So that's how you're going to figure out these things as you start to learn. And I promise very quickly, you'll start to totally retain this stuff and it won't seem like such a struggle. So let's check out and see how this all works inside W3 schools to really give you an idea of what I mean by this interactive window I keep talking about. All right, so you see on this left side, this is live coding, right? And I replicated or recreated the definition that we had in that last screen into this live editor. So you can see how interactive this is and how it's going to populate and actually create that image, so you can see how your styling is going to affect your images. So on the right side, you can see I've got that image, got really subtly rounded corners. It's got that yellow border in the weight and color that I specified. And then it's got that padding, that 5 pixel space in between the image and the border. So now let's use the same editor and let's start playing around with the definition so that you can see how the editor is going to update that for you. So again, you can see what you're doing before you ever touch your own style sheet. All right, so here I've changed the border radius. I dialed that way up so we don't have subtly rounded corners, but we've got a full oval by making that 200 pixels. I changed the border to something a little bit thicker, and then I changed the color to gray, and then I increased the padding, which is again that space between the image and the border. Pretty fucking cool, right? So think about being able to make this kind of drastic change to all of your images in just a couple of minutes of coding, right? This is why I call CSS magical. And I have to say it in that voice because it's that fucking magical. All right, so just, give yourself time, right? This is a new skill you're learning, okay? There is obviously a learning curve associated with this, but like I've said, 5 times already, I promise you it's not nearly as scary when you really get in there, you dive in, you practice, you get your hands dirty, and you start doing this yourself. And you're gonna see me coding so much stuff over and over again, using these same kind of properties and values and these same definitions for your text and your images and your links, that you are going to feel much more comfortable after this workshop and then be pretty much unfucking stoppable once you get in and you get some playtime under your belt. So give yourself a break, give yourself some time, and do not let overwhelm crush your website DIY skills, because you got this. All right, so there's one last thing that I want to teach you about CSS before we dive into some screen sharing, and that's the important rule. So if you add an exclamation mark and important to the end of a value, like you see here on the right side, that value is going to be overriding regardless of where it is in the cascading, okay? So meaning if you're not sure what's controlling that HTML tag and you put in the font family and it's still being overridden by something else and you're not sure where that's coming from, if you pop that exclamation mark important right after your value before the semicolon in your CSS definition, it is going to override that style regardless. Like I said, so it's kind of a safety in case things are kind of buried in your style sheets and you're not sure where it is. This is a really handy tool I use all the time. And again, I'll show you it in action as we go through this workshop. So how about we start screen sharing and I show you all of this good shit in action. So pop on over to the next video and we will start getting our website on.